What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are checking out the Samsung Galaxy A05s. Now, if you're familiar with Samsung's A series, or I guess just smartphone naming schemes in general, you might assume that an S phone, like this one, is an upgrade or improvement over the non-S version of its namesake. In this particular case, the A05s was actually released at about the same time as the regular A05, and while this S version is technically the better device, I'm not so sure that it's the must-have, absolute better buy by comparison. The A05s on paper does have better specs, like a higher quality display and an extra camera lens, but what most people associate with an S phone is speed. And the A05s doesn't seem to deliver any better performance than its non-S counterpart, which in the end might actually be the motivating factor for a lot of people to skip this phone entirely. Now, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here. There's a lot to talk about with the A05s, and I'm of course going to fill you in on everything you need to know, including all the differences from the regular A05. But first things first, as always, let's just quickly unbox it so I can show you what does and does not come inside the package if you decide to buy one. So first up, of course, is that familiar Samsung logo printed on a cardboard packet of stuff that includes a whole bunch of paperwork and really the one and only accessory you still get with these phones, a USB-C to USB-C cable for charging it. Next up is the phone itself, of course. I obviously opted for purple or violet, as Samsung calls it, but you can also snag it in black, silver, and light green. And at the very bottom of the box, there is a SIM ejector tool there, but nothing else hidden inside this very minimal packaging. With all that stuff out of the way, here is the A05s once again, and as we rip off that wrapping, I want to briefly touch on the pricing and availability of this phone so you know what you might pay versus a regular A05 and also where this phone is currently being sold. The full retail price of the A05s is around $150, and I say that only because depending on where in the world you're located, you'll probably see it anywhere from like $140-ish all the way up to a rumored $169 for the supposed US launch maybe happening this month. By comparison, the regular A05 is closer to the $120 to $140 range, sometimes a little cheaper. And look, I know that doesn't seem like a huge price difference, maybe 20 or 25 bucks either way, but with prices this low, the percent change between a $115 A05, for example, and a $150 A05s is fairly significant. Both A05s are widely available in most Asia-Pacific regions right now, parts of Europe, and will likely be launched for US carriers later on, but no matter where you live, right now you can snag them unlocked directly from Samsung online and from various third-party retailers like Amazon and Walmart. And if you want to do some comparison shopping of your own, I'll leave some links down below in the video description. The A05s is a quintessential Samsung A series phone for 2024. It's big with a 6.7-inch screen corner to corner, and since it's a lower end phone, it still has a more dated budget design with a camera notch, big bottom chin, and relatively thick black borders framing the display. You get a screen to body ratio of barely 83%, but if you've used any lower end A series phone from the last 3 or 4 years, you know this form factor. It's tall, it's a little chunky, but it's still a big, huge screen at a very nice price. Around back, the A05s is identical to the rest of Samsung's A series lineup, which is great. That's noteworthy only because in previous years, that wasn't always the case with the cheapest of devices. But not only do you get a sleek, modern, and fairly minimal design, it also mimics what you see on Samsung's current S series. So put this phone next to the $800 S24, and at least from the back, you can hardly tell a difference. That doesn't mean this phone hides its budgetiness per se. It's an all-plastic phone all the way around. You see and feel that. It's not waterproof in any way either. There's also no wireless charging, but regardless, it's a lot nicer looking device than the cheaper A series phones of yesteryear. Taking a look around at everything else, on the left side, you'll find your dual SIM and micro SD card tray. This particular A05s, the global international version, has 2 physical SIM card slots and a separate micro SD card slot, so you can utilize everything at once. There's no eSIM support on this phone, and as far as onboard storage, you have the same 64 or 128 gigabyte options here as the regular A05, so you don't get any additional storage with the S, but the microSD card support is nice to have. On the right side, there's familiar volume and power buttons, and the power button here is also your fingerprint sensor for unlocking. This is something the A05 actually does not have, so tack on a tally for the A05s if you're still keeping score, and it seems to work perfectly fine. Nothing really at the top of the phone. At the bottom, the headphone jack is still there alongside the USB-C port and single downward-facing speaker. No secondary loudspeaker on this phone, unfortunately, just your earpiece for phone calls up top above the selfie camera, and around back, like I mentioned, a triple lens camera setup. So if you want to know the single biggest difference between the A05s and the regular A05, well, it's with the display. The A05s's 6.7-inch screen is still a PLS LCD panel, same as the regular A05, but this phone has a full HD 2400 by 1080 resolution display, cramming in way more pixels per inch, about 393, compared to the 720 resolution of the A05. On top of that, the A05s also offers a 90 Hz refresh rate, so visually the display looks smoother and your taps, touches, and swipes will feel snappier and more responsive. But that's kind of it. And to be honest, if you didn't read the spec sheet, I'm not sure most people would have been able to tell a difference. The A05s arguably doesn't offer a better viewing experience, at least not obviously so. It's not OLED, so it's still not very bright. It's not as colorful. There's also a lot of glare with the cheaper front glass. Sure, if you look really closely, the display is a bit sharper, which is important at this size, but from a normal viewing distance, a few feet away from your face, people still often argue that 720p and 1080p displays aren't that drastically different. And even after a few years now of budget phones getting 90 and 120 Hz high refresh rate displays, I still see a good percentage of average consumers not caring or not seeing much of a difference with a high refresh rate display. So the people who get it, and maybe the 90 Hz plus the higher screen resolution is worth the extra 20 or 30 bucks in this case. But I feel like if display specs and the overall viewing experience is your top priority for a smartphone, you could instead opt for the Samsung A15, for example, or A25, where your extra dollar goes way, way further. That's also where I'm at. I mean, is the display on the A05s better? Yes, but is it better or different enough to get this phone over an A05? Or does it even warrant having two different versions of the same phone? I don't really think so. As for the out loud listening experience, the single speaker setup on the A05s shouldn't really come as a surprise. This is a budget option on a budget phone, and if you want something better, you'll have to opt for the A15 again here at least, but here's a quick sound sample so you can hear what it offers.
I just wanna be alone.
Now, out of all of the specs and features to be different on an S phone versus a non-S phone, you'd think the processor or the performance capabilities overall would just be a given. But on the A05s, weirdly enough, that doesn't seem to be the case. The internal components on this phone are different. You get the Qualcomm Snapdragon 680 4G chip versus the MediaTek Helio G85 on the regular A05. So woohoo, it's a 1 year newer but still quite old sort of budget SoC with Geekbench scores that are almost identical to what we saw on the regular A05. You also have the same RAM options, 4 or 6 gigabytes to choose from, so that's not even any different, and the same storage capacity that I mentioned earlier. So your extra dollar really doesn't give you much. And while some people will absolutely die on the Snapdragon is better hill in their performance or spec arguments, at the end of the day, I'm just not seeing how this A05s offers any real day-to-day performance advantages over the the regular A05, especially since the A05s I think is supposed to be a better phone in some capacity, right? There's also no difference in the software experience. All the budget A-series phones this year run the full One UI and Android 14 setup, no One UI Core anymore. So arguably the question becomes, what exactly are you paying more for here? I'm not really sure. Maybe someone in the comments can enlighten me. But on the plus side, these budget Samsung A-series phones now are still far better performance-wise than their previous cheapo counterparts. I mean, you might remember there were other A0 phones that I explicitly said do not buy. But with the lowest end A-series phones this year, whether you get the A05 or A05s, they're a lot more usable. This is still the sort of phone, though, that really is for someone who just does the basic stuff. You're not going to be playing competitive Call of Duty on this thing at all, but the important thing is the stuff that this phone should do, like just smoothly run the regular basic old apps and keep up with stuff running in the background. That's exactly what it can do. And that's seriously something I couldn't say with previous A0 phones. To me, though, with the A05s specifically, I feel like not having any notable spec or performance difference here is a big miss, and it's the single biggest reason why I don't think the A05s is a must-have choice over the regular A05. I guess some people might make an argument that a Snapdragon processor, like the one in this phone, could be better optimized for battery life and longevity. I mean, when you look at the more in-depth performance scores, that's something that seems to favor the 680 over the MediaTek processor, but the 5,000 milliamp battery inside this phone is the same size as a lot of the other A-series phones this year, actually, and the 25-watt wired charging speeds it supports is just as fast as all the other phones too. And you still need to go out and buy your own wall plug, by the way, to achieve those speeds. So I personally don't feel that the Snapdragon processor will produce so much extra battery life or performance optimization throughout the day that it's worth that difference. But I'll push this phone as hard as I can for my full review and really see if I can draw a more conclusive result. So the last and most obvious thing the A05s has is a triple lens camera setup around back. The regular A05 has a dual lens setup, but this is one of those instances where more isn't always better. The 50 megapixel main lens and the 2 megapixel depth sensors are seemingly the same on both phones. The A05s's third lens is a 2 megapixel macro, which is used for those up-close pictures, but seeing as that's the only hardware difference, I'm once again not understanding how this A05s is much better of a device. The selfie camera on the A05s seems to be a little better, I guess. It's a 13 megapixel lens, but inside the camera app, the A05s is still plagued by the same budget camera features and shooting modes you'd find on the regular A05. Sure, you can tap into that 50 megapixel lens for sharper pictures, and there's portrait and night mode and some manual controls you can utilize if you'd like, but there's still no 4K video recording, no enhanced video stabilization, and nothing else besides macro photography that indicates this A05s has any better of a camera setup. The couple of sample pictures I snapped here do look decent enough, and I'll probably have a dedicated comparison video with the regular A05 after I take a whole bunch more pictures so we can really dive deep into the differences. But to me, if the A05s is supposed to have a better camera setup, it should have had a wide-angle lens, or more shooting modes, or anything else besides the cheap cop-out edition of a third lens that isn't all that useful. Overall, to me, the A05s is a bit of an oddity, really. Is it arguably the better device when compared to its non-S counterpart? Sure, it has a better display, it has different specs powering it that some people might argue are a little better, but not by much. It technically has an extra camera lens around back and a little better selfie camera up front. Perhaps the saving grace here is the fact that Samsung released both the A05 and this A05s at basically the same time. So the A05s, I guess, isn't so much a direct upgrade, just another option. Maybe the phones were intended for different parts of the world, but if you're shopping around right now, they're both going to be available. And between the two, honestly, I don't know that I can justify opting for the A05s if price is my main concern, which I feel like if you're shopping for these phones in particular, that is the main concern. You just don't seem to be getting a true S phone that's different or better or upgraded enough to justify the extra dollars, but maybe I'm missing something. If I am, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course, especially if you bought an A05s already. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys later.